Ethical scenario issue 1. So I'm not 100% sure how we're going to do this online. So I'll go through these and then I'll talk after each one why it may or may not be an ethical issue. So a planner from local government in a jurisdiction that's home to a popular football team has learned that the football club has offered several members of the planning staff tickets to a sold-out game. Recognizing there may be a conflict, the planner's boss and colleagues decide to pay for their tickets outright, thus absolving the question of whether or not the tickets were a gift. Is there still an ethical conflict? Planners are likely to get requests for transportation security or development issues regarding the stadium. Well, they might. So in order not to be beholden, the planning staff should not have to be given a ticket, even something as simple as a ticket, but certainly not in a box seat. Ideally, they'd want to keep ethically things at arm's length. So it's not so much whether or not who pays for the ticket or who reimburses the ticket, but not to be in an atmosphere that may allow certain conversations to occur that would not be available to those who may have had other views. I think if the tickets were paid for and they were not in a box, they were just in the normal stands, it would be fine. But if it was in a special corporate box, I would say there would be an ethical dilemma with that. Scenario 2. A developer asks you as a public sector planner to help him select the team of lawyers and architects you'd recommend. How do you respond? You don't want to get into a specific recommendation. There's some communities that maintain lists of consultants that they've worked for in the past. So it could be acceptable to simply hand a copy of that list to the developer. It's also acceptable to discuss multiple consultants that are familiar with the community and its plans, regulations, and opportunities. But you won't suggest specific lawyers, architects, or other professionals, because it could be an ethical dilemma in both ways, both for them and for you and the developer. Are there any other ways you can assist? Well, I said you can give them a list or teams of people, for example. Two planners worked together at a private developer for several years before joining the planning department in a large city. After 2 years at the department, one planner returns to the private sector. How does this change the personal and professional relationship of the planners? Well, this often varies based on situational variables such as the size of an office or department. It's important to reflect and consider how these circumstances influence the outcome. If it's a larger department, there's usually more than one person who handles permits and applications, so it's best to explain to the friend that if they're going to keep the friendship, they can't expect to continue a business relationship. They'd need to trust that they trained additional staff to effectively review plans, etc. However, in a small resource-strapped planning department, it may be necessary to make arrangements with a neighbouring jurisdiction or even hire an outside consultant to perform reviews. You are working for a consulting firm that completes a master plan for a new community facility. After it's completed, the community releases a tender for engineering services based on recommendations. Do you foresee any conflicts? Actually, this is often the lifeblood of many consulting firms. There are many planning and engineering firms that perform these services for communities. But as a planner, you must be careful to ensure that you do not write the master plan to include recommendations that are too narrowly defined, so that your firm or any particular firm is well suited for the work. Such a project requires the planner to continue to reflect on their motives behind the recommendation. Are they in the public interest or just simply to garner more work? A planner works in a private consulting firm. They have personal objections to one of the projects that the firm is working on, and so submit a formal objection to the development proposal once it's been publicly advertised. What are the ethical dilemmas related to this scenario and how best to manage them? So, for example, a member of a planning board lives adjacent to a proposed subdivision. A new road will be close to the member's property. She recuses herself from participating in the planning board review process, but then puts on her property owner hat and takes a strong position in public opposing the subdivision. Is that acceptable? Must a resident refrain from taking any public position? The answer assumes that the planning board member holds the AICP credential. the Code of Ethics of that states, we shall not use the power of any office to seek or obtain a special advantage that is not in the public interest. In addition, the Code of Ethics restricts public officials from accepting any advantage that may be perceived to be related to the official's office. Even if the board member recuses herself from participation, her position as a board member testifying against an application before the board is a use of power of her office that could result in the benefit to the board members. But the code would not prevent her from publicly opposing the project in other settings, as long as she did not claim that her membership of the planning board should accord her view greater weight. Now, this is all very well and good, but I personally know people who worked for government agencies and objected in their private capacity to something that their agency was doing, and while they weren't sacked, they were put into what the state government quite often refers to as special projects. In other words, it's somewhere where they want to sack someone, but they can't. So they get put into, and they pretty much lose all their authority or anything that they had. I don't know if special projects is still used like that anymore, but it's very important to be aware of, yes, you can do it, and it is ethical, but it may have repercussions. And some of the whistleblower things nowadays, I'd be careful. Actually, to be honest, I wouldn't be careful. I'd go and do it. But other people might be more concerned about whether or not they get fired from their job or something like that.